Divorce had stripped everything from me: home, stability, and dignity. My belongings fit into 2 suitcases. My clothes smelled faintly of the cheap motel I slept in. And every day I walked the streets wondering how I'd survive the night. The world felt vast and indifferent, as if it had forgotten I even existed. I passed crowded cafes where laughter spilled out and restaurants where families ate together. I passed parks where children ran past parents who held hands and whispered secrets I'd never share again. My stomach ached, but the emptiness in my chest hurt more. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. Your one tap truly motivates me to keep creating for you. People looked at me, but they didn't see me. Homeless, divorced, broken. I had become a ghost in my own life. I hadn't asked for this, but here I was, counting coins, rationing meals, sleeping under streetlights, feeling the shame of failure press against every rib. Then, one cold evening, as I sat on a bench staring at the fading city lights, a voice broke through my haze. "Are you Sophia?" I looked up, startled. A woman stood there, impeccably dressed, holding a leather folder. Her eyes were kind but sharp, her tone serious. "You just inherited $47 million. I blinked. Once. Twice. My mind scrambled. Inheritance? Money? Who? My ex? Some mistake. I had no family left, or so I thought. My heart thudded against my ribs as she opened the folder and handed me papers, letters, and legal notices. I sat frozen. The world that had been cruel, empty, and dark minutes ago suddenly shimmered with possibilities. All my pain, all my hardship had brought me here to a moment that felt like a miracle, yet terrifying in its enormity. I was homeless. I had nothing. And now, in the span of a breath, I had nearly $50 million and a future I had never dared to imagine. The stranger smiled gently. "I know this is sudden, but it's real. You inherited it. Your name is on everything." I couldn't speak. I didn't know if I should cry or laugh. Everything I had lost, everything that had crushed me, was now balanced by something so immense I couldn't comprehend. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I allowed myself to hope. The first night after the stranger's revelation, I barely slept. I sat on the edge of a bench at the small motel I had been squatting in, Esty hiring at the legal documents, rereading her words over and over. Inherit $47 million. My name was on it. Every letter, every signature verified by lawyers. My name, Sophia, owner, beneficiary. It was surreal. I had walked streets for weeks with nothing, yet somehow a life-altering fortune had been waiting for me. It made me question everything I thought I knew about my life. Had it always been there? Was it some cruel irony that I had suffered so much to finally receive what I didn't even know existed? The stranger, her name was Clarissa, stayed with me for a while, explaining the details. Apparently, a distant relative, a grandmother I barely remembered from childhood, had left her entire estate to me in a secret will, bypassing my parents and other family members who had long since turned their backs on me. Legal loopholes had kept it hidden until now. My name had been verified through old records and DNA confirmation. Everything was legitimate. I wanted to scream, to cry, to laugh, but I didn't. I was too tired, too worn down by years of rejection, to feel anything other than a quiet disbelief. Homeless one day, heiress the next, it felt like living in a dream, a narrative too bizarre to be true. The next morning, I returned to the streets briefly, just to touch the reality I'd lived. The cracked sidewalks, the noise, the smells, they were all familiar, cruelly familiar. The benches where I had slept, the store windows I had gazed into wishing for warmth, all suddenly felt absurd against the promise of the life waiting for me. I had been invisible for so long, yet the world was about to notice me, and I didn't know if I was ready. Clarissa guided me through the legal processes. We visited lawyers, signed forms, and handled tax documents. Each signature was a reminder. I had a claim, a right, a future that wasn't just about survival anymore. But with that wealth came responsibility. Management companies, advisors, legal guardians for certain properties. I had to learn how to navigate this unfamiliar world quickly. I had spent years learning to survive on nothing, and now I was being asked to steward millions. I thought about my ex-husband. He had walked out of my life, leaving me broken and destitute. I thought about my parents, who had ignored my suffering and chosen to elevate my sister at every turn. I thought about the nights my children and I went hungry, the arguments, the shame. Suddenly, all of that pain transformed, not into anger or vengeance, but into perspective. I had endured. I had survived. And now, the world was mine to claim. It wasn't instant joy. I still carried the scars. I still hesitated to trust. Clarissa reminded me gently, "This is sudden, Sophia. Take your time. You're allowed to be cautious." But I couldn't. The money, the inheritance, the opportunity, it demanded action. I began visiting the properties, the luxury hotels, the downtown offices, the villas. Walking through spaces I had never imagined, I realized just how vast the fortune was. Millions stacked across assets, investments, businesses operating in multiple countries. I was suddenly responsible for thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on my decisions. And then came the phone calls. Lawyers, financial advisors, distant relatives I'd never known, and even my estranged family trying to reach me. They wanted explanations. My mother, hesitant but greedy, asked if she could claim a share. My sister tried to negotiate, pretending she had rights. I listened politely, explained nothing, and filed the calls away. My life was no longer theirs to dictate. I had survived humiliation, deprivation, and betrayal, and now, for the first time, I held all the cards. I moved into my first property, a modest but elegant apartment in the city where I could breathe without fear, without judgment, without the weight of being invisible. I started rebuilding slowly, hiring staff, learning about the hotels and assets, meeting the people whose work had created this fortune. I became involved, hands-on, determined not to be just a figurehead. Every decision reminded me of the lessons I had learned in hardship, patience, resourcefulness, and humility. But the best part? My children. For the first time, I could give them stability, security, and dignity. Meals on time, beds to sleep in, toys, books, opportunities. They didn't have to wait for crumbs anymore. The same bitterness that had shaped my youth now fueled the promise of their future. Evenings, I would sit quietly reflecting. Homeless one day, inheritor the next. Rejection had led to resilience. Hardship had taught me independence. And a stranger's question, "Are you Sophia?" had transformed everything. By the end of the first month, I had claimed my inheritance, but more importantly, I had reclaimed myself. No longer a victim of circumstances or relatives' negligence, I had stepped into the life I deserved. And as I watched the city lights from my new apartment, I realized that while money could give comfort, what truly mattered was control, agency, and the power to shape a life without fear. The world that once ignored me would now know my name. And I wouldn't just survive anymore. I would thrive. This wasn't just luck. It was a chance to rebuild, to reclaim, to finally step into a life I'd been denied. I just had to survive until I could claim it. I finally stepped into my new life, children safe and smiling, the past behind me. Homeless no more. I owned everything. And for the first time, I felt unstoppable.